The moment Anders stepped off the plane at Charles de Gaulle Airport, he thought his life was just beginning. His suitcase rattled behind him, filled with carefully folded dreams and the words his parents had whispered that morning. "Make us proud. This is your chance." His chest still ached from the long hug his mother gave him, the rare silence from his father as he handed over the passport. But within the first 30 seconds at the immigration desk, that hopeful haze shattered. The officer asked for the acceptance letter. Anders smiled, explaining he was here to study culinary arts. She asked again. He checked every folder. His hands began to shake. There was no enrollment confirmation, no contact number. Only a tourist visa. The woman frowned and excused herself. Anders stood alone watching passengers reunite with family, lovers, laughing, babies crying in joy. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He grabbed it like a lifeline, but it was a low battery warning. No missed calls, no new texts. He dialed his father voicemail, mother straight to voicemail, again, until the truth began to settle in his stomach like something spoiled. He wasn't sent to study. He had been sent away, in that sterile airport corridor surrounded by strangers speaking a language he barely understood. Anders felt his throat close in panic. His only connection to anyone in the room was a last name on his passport, one now soaked in betrayal. The security officer returned this time with another woman in a Navy uniform and kind eyes. She didn't smile, but her voice was calm. Her name tag read Lise. She guided him into a private waiting area and handed him a bottle of water. He didn't speak, didn't cry, not yet. He stayed in the airport for hours that melted into a blurred loop of fluorescent lights and hushed voices. No one came for him. No one answered his calls. When night fell, they offered him a cot in a holding room. He curled up in the scratchy blanket, still wearing his travel shoes, terrified to sleep in case this was all a mistake, in case someone would come knocking. "We're sorry, mijo. There's been a misunderstanding." But no one did. The next morning, Lisa returned with bread and coffee. She asked simple questions. He gave simple answers. Eventually, his voice cracked and the truth came out. That he was gay, that his family never spoke of it. That the study abroad opportunity had come only a week after he came out. That the final words he remembered from his father were, "Don't come back unless you're someone else." Lise didn't flinch. She only said, "You are not the first to be left here, but maybe you'll be one of the few who don't stay lost." Later that day, a volunteer driver named Mr. Bao came to pick him up. Anders had never met someone like him before. An older man with warm hands, a slow French-Vietnamese accent, and eyes that didn't look away when he said he had no home. They rode through gray streets and icy silence. At a red light, Mr. Bao glanced at him and said, "Being thrown away doesn't mean you're worthless. It means someone else couldn't see." Anders didn't reply. He couldn't. But for the first time in days, he felt something stir in his chest. Not hope, not yet. Just the smallest breath that maybe, just maybe this wasn't the end. That night, he slept on a thin mattress in a shared shelter room in the suburbs of Paris. It was cold. Loud, cramped, but no one judged him for crying himself to sleep. No one asked him to be someone else. He would learn to live with the ache and eventually turn it into hunger. Not for approval, but for freedom. This was not the life his family planned for him, but it would be the one he chose for himself. If this story speaks to you, you're not alone. Subscribe to Heart Stories for more powerful journeys of identity, family, and the courage to rebuild. In the weeks that followed, Anders found himself suspended in a version of life that felt unfamiliar and fragile, like walking on cracked glass. The shelter where Mr. Bao had dropped him off wasn't much. Just concrete walls, 3 meals a day, and a rotating staff of tired social workers. But it was the first place where no one asked what was wrong with him. They just asked if he wanted more soup. At first, he barely spoke. His French was clumsy, his English only slightly better, and most of the other boys at the shelter didn't talk much either. Some were refugees. Some had been kicked out of their homes. Some were younger than him, already hardened by the world. Anders stayed quiet, watched everything. But each morning, Lisa called. She didn't ask how he was. She told him the next small thing he needed to do: visit the immigration office, meet with a legal aid volunteer, apply for temporary protection status. Her voice became a thread that pulled him through the fog. At the end of each call, she always said, "You are not forgotten." It was such a strange, radical thing to hear. Anders started showing up to language classes held in the corner of a community kitchen. At first, he sat in the back, mouthing words he barely understood. But over time, something shifted. He began writing things down, sounding out syllables, learning how to ask for bread, how to say, "I don't know yet," and eventually, "I'm not going home." During the day, he cleaned floors and washed dishes. At night, he studied job listings he couldn't yet apply for. It wasn't glamorous, but it was the first time he understood the difference between surviving and being alive. Mr. Bao visited the shelter once a week, always bringing a new story. He never asked about Andres's family. Instead, he talked about growing up in Vietnam, falling in love with a French man being disowned, rebuilding a life from the pieces left behind. One evening after dinner, he sat beside Anders and said, "You think survival is about proving them wrong? It's not. It's about proving to yourself that they were never right." Those words stayed with him. 2 months later, a place opened up at a youth culinary training program on the edge of the city. Lise had pulled strings. Anders almost turned it down. He didn't feel ready, but she looked him straight in the eye and said, "The world may not wait for you to believe in yourself. That doesn't mean it won't welcome you anyway." The first day of class, he stood outside the building for nearly an hour. Everyone else looked confident, or at least good at pretending. Anders had nothing but a second-hand coat, 2 notebooks, and the quiet fear that he didn't belong. But then the head chef walked past, glanced at him and said, "Late is worse than nervous. Come in." And so he did. Anders learned how to hold a knife, how to slice without fear, how to make stock from bones and patience. He wasn't the best in the class, but he showed up every day. His fingers blistered, his feet ached, and more than once he burned himself on the stove. But he stayed. He learned, and somewhere along the way he laughed again. By the end of the program, he had built something no one could take from him. A skill, a trade, a path. He found part-time work in a small cafe run by a lesbian couple who barely asked questions. They liked that he worked hard, that he didn't cut corners, that he cleaned the espresso machine without being told. One night after closing, the older of the two, women sat him down and asked gently, "Do you have anyone in the city?" Anders thought about it for a long moment, then nodded. "Yes," he said, "but I didn't find them, they found me." That winter, as snow fell over Paris, Anders received official notice of his protected resident status. He was now legally allowed to stay. He held the document in his hands, breath shaking, and remembered the first night at the airport. The bench, the silence, the voicemail that never got returned. He didn't cry, he didn't smile. He simply whispered, "I'm still here," and that was enough. There was no sign, no ribbon cutting, no grand opening post when Anders unlocked the door to his own cafe for the first time. Just a small handwritten note taped to the window that read, "Café pour les oubliés," coffee for the forgotten. A name chosen not out of pity, but as a quiet promise to anyone who had ever been discarded like he once was. The space was modest, cracked tile floors, secondhand chairs, a mismatched collection of ceramic mugs. But it was his. He painted the walls himself, framed photos of Latin American poets on one side, and lined the shelves with cookbooks written by queer authors, activists, immigrants. He didn't want the place to be trendy. He wanted it to feel like somewhere a kid could sit for hours without needing to order more than tea. Somewhere you didn't have to explain yourself at the door. At first, business was slow, but the people who came stayed. Young artists, asylum seekers, students estranged from family. One night, a trans woman sobbed in the bathroom after someone called her a slur on the street. Anders made her a free hot chocolate, handed it to her without a word, and sat beside her on the cold floor until she was ready to leave. He wasn't trying to be noble. He just remembered what it felt like to have no place to land. When Mr. Bao visited for the first time, he touched the countertop like it was made of gold. Anders had reserved a stool just for him with a small brass plate. For the man who turned a car ride into a rescue. Mr. Bao smiled, but his hands trembled. "No one ever saved me like that when I was your age," he said softly. Anders didn't know what to say. He just served him lunch and made sure the bowl never emptied. Over time, Lisa started dropping by as well. Always with a quiet smile, sometimes leaving behind food donations or flyers for support groups. She never stayed long. Anders suspected she didn't want to take credit for what he'd built. But one morning, as she sipped her espresso, she slid a file across the counter. "You've lived here long enough. It's time to apply for long-term residency." Anders stared at the papers for a long time, his name now spelled correctly, his gender marker now accurate, his address now permanent. He thought about the boy who once sat shivering on an airport bench, wondering if he would disappear into paperwork forever. And here he was about to become part of the very system that once didn't know what to do with him. But just as the edges of his life began to settle, news arrived like a cold gust through an open window. Mr. Bao's visa was under review. Again. He was now in his 70s. The shelter where he volunteered was restructuring. His work permit was tied to it. If the papers didn't clear, he'd have to leave. Paris was his home, but not legally. Not in the way that mattered when government started drawing lines. Anders didn't hesitate. He gathered documents, sought legal counsel, and filled out every form this time as the sponsor, the provider, the one who had something to offer. He wrote a personal statement describing how Mr. Bao had been his sole support when he was abandoned, how he'd helped him rebuild from rubble, how a man like him didn't deserve to be erased by a bureaucratic technicality. The clerk at the embassy raised an eyebrow. "You're sponsoring him. You're how old?" Anders answered without blinking. "Old enough to owe someone my future." He submitted everything and was told to return for an in-person follow-up. Nothing unusual, but when he arrived 2 weeks later, standing in the waiting area with Mr. Bao's file clutched tightly, a voice behind him turned his spine to stone. "Anders!" He turned slowly. His parents stood there, older grayer, still wearing that polished, tight-lipped composure he remembered. And beside them a boy, his younger brother, taller than he remembered, quiet. They were applying for a visa too, for the same country, for the same city where they had left him behind without looking back. The marble floors of the embassy waiting area gleamed beneath the soft clinical lights. But all Anders could see was the space between him and the people who had once called themselves his family. His hand tightening around the manila folder. His name was printed neatly on the top. Anders Santiago Ruiz, sponsor petitioner, resident of France. Not son, not disgrace, not problem. His father was the first to speak. "We didn't know you were in Paris." Of course they didn't. They hadn't tried, not after the silence at the airport, not after the unanswered calls, the ignored emails, the years that followed where Anders was erased from every Christmas photo, every group message, every prayer circle. He didn't answer. His mother stepped forward, always the softer one, though. No less complicit. "We heard from someone at the church that you opened a cafe, that you're doing well. We're glad." It was such a small, brittle word to throw across the ocean of absence they'd created. Anders forced himself to breathe. Not to cry, not to lash out. That would give them power again, and he'd learned pain doesn't always need an audience. The embassy clerk called his name. He nodded and stepped forward. As he handed over the folder, he caught a glimpse of the note clipped to his file application to sponsor Mr. Bao Nguyen, residency based on humanitarian grounds. The clerk asked routine questions. Anders answered clearly, firmly. Every word a stone laid in the foundation of something solid, something no one could take. Behind him, his parents waited, fidgeting, unsure whether to leave or stay. When his interview ended, they followed him out into the hallway. "We're here for Mataz," his father finally said. "He wants to study at a university in Lyon. We thought it would be good for him to see the world, get opportunities." Anders turned to his younger brother. Their eyes met, not as siblings, but as strangers who might have shared a childhood if things had been different. Mataz looked away. His mother tried again. "We didn't know how to reach you. And now seeing you here, it's clear you made a life, a good one. A good one built from nothing. Without them, because of them." Anders stood still for a moment, then said calmly, "You didn't lose me because I was gay. You lost me because you threw me away." His father's face hardened. "You think we had a choice?" Anders raised an eyebrow. "I think you made one." They were silent, he continued. "I came here today to protect someone who stood by me when no one else did. The man who gave me a ride from an airport bench to my first safe bed, who called me Khan before I believed I was worthy of the word. He's the reason I'm alive." He didn't say it to make them feel guilty. He said it because it was true. His mother reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope. "It's just a letter, in case one day you're ready." Anders didn't take it. "You don't get to hand me redemption like it's the flyer." Mataz looked up. "I didn't know what they did. I didn't know they left you." Anders nodded. He didn't blame the boy. He blamed the silence. "I hope you get your visa," he said gently. "I hope you find something better. Just know this. If anyone ever tells you you're unworthy of love, don't believe them, even if it's your own family." He turned to leave. Didn't look back. Outside, the wind was sharp against his face, but it was nothing compared to the chill of their absence those years ago. Mr. Bao was waiting on a bench near the entrance. Anders walked up and placed a hand on his shoulder. "All done?" Bao asked. Anders nodded yes and no. They didn't speak of what had happened. They didn't need to. Bao handed him a small bag with lunch wrapped inside like always. Anders smiled faintly. That evening back at the cafe, Anders added a new photo to the wall behind the register. It was him and Mr. Bao standing outside the shelter on the first day he moved in. He was thinner then, eyes haunted, but even in the faded image, Bao had his arm around him. Beneath the photo, Anders pinned a handwritten note. "Chosen family sees you, even when blood turns his face away." He didn't burn the letter from his mother. He didn't open it either. He left it in the lost and found jar by the cafe door. If someone claimed it, fine. If not, it would stay there unopened, just like the part of him that once begged to be loved by people who left him at gate 39. Spring in Paris crept in like a slow forgiveness. The cafe window stayed open longer, letting in the scent of rain-washed stone and fresh bread. Anders adjusted the stools near the front each morning, wiping down the counters as sunbeams pooled on the tiled floor. Regulars returned like migrating birds, some with stories, some with silence, all with the quiet understanding that this place wasn't just for coffee, it was for breathing. Bao's residency was officially approved 2 weeks after the embassy visit. A thin envelope had arrived tucked beneath the morning mail. Anders didn't open it right away. He knew Bao knew too. He just smiled as Anders slid the paper across the cafe counter that afternoon and said, "Looks like we're both staying, old man." They didn't celebrate with champagne. Instead, Anders closed the cafe early, made arroz con leche the way his grandmother used to, and they ate quietly at the back table while rain tapped against the windows like an old friend. Later that week, Lisa dropped with a folder of paperwork, final details for Anders' own permanent residency. She handed it over with the same no-nonsense efficiency she'd had the day she met him at the airport. But when she turned to leave, she paused, then touched his shoulder gently. "You didn't just stay," she said. "You became..." Anders didn't know how to thank her, so he didn't try. He just nodded, letting the words settle like roots. The cafe began hosting community dinners every last Sunday of the month. No reservations, no fixed menu, just anyone who needed a meal and a seat. Anders cooked whatever was in season, whatever was donated, whatever felt like comfort. Some nights there were students sharing stories across language barriers. Other nights, a table of queer elders sang quietly in Spanish, weeping between bites of mole. And sometimes people came just to sit, to not be alone. One Sunday near the end of service, Matas appeared. He stood at the threshold like someone arriving late to a party they weren't sure they were invited to. He wasn't with their parents. He didn't bring questions or demands. Just a shy wave and a backpack over his shoulder. "I didn't know where else to go," he said when Anders finally approached. Anders didn't answer with words. He pointed to an empty chair at the corner table and walked back into the kitchen. That night, Matas stayed until closing. He didn't speak much, but he helped Anders stack chairs and sweep crumbs from the floor. When he finally left, he whispered, "I'm not like them." Anders nodded. "You don't have to be." Later, as he stood behind the counter alone, Anders looked at the photo. Wall faces of friends, guests, staff, family, not by blood, but by choice. Then he looked down at his own hands, calloused, firm, steady. He remembered the boy at the airport, the cot in the shelter, the numb mornings in a country where no one called his name. And now there was a name on the sign, a line on the lease, a heartbeat in every dish served here. And it was his. He didn't need to go back, he had arrived. On the cafe's front door, next to the handwritten hours and a rainbow flag sticker faded by sun, Anders posted a final note. "If you've ever been left behind, this place is already yours, come in. We saved you a seat." And with that, he turned off the lights, stepped out into the night air, and locked the door of the home he built, once denied, now claimed. Have you ever had to build your own version of family, or choose healing over being accepted? Subscribe to Heart Stories to follow more real stories like Anders', where identity meets resilience. And love is something we create, not just inherit. There's always a seat here for you.